Never Seen It Film Club, the film club where we watch films that you've never seen. I'm Accidental Theatre's Emma Bainbridge, and joining me is the director of Cinepunked, Robert J. Simpson. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm good, yeah. This was, perhaps unsurprisingly, a film that I don't recall having seen before we agreed to do this in the show. So I feel for me, like, I mean, I've just gone and seen something new, which has been fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I was very adamant. Out of anything that I really wanted our back to school season to be Heathers, because it's something that I've only seen a handful of times, but I've never seen it on the big screen. I was really hoping that I could get to see that, and I'm very excited because it was an awesome show.
I just killed my best friend.
And your worst enemy.
Same difference. My teen angst has a body count. This is a tragic thing.
Hallelujah.
We scare people into not being assholes.
What did you say, dickhead?
I did not want them dead.
You did too.
Did not. Shut up.
I love my dead gay son.
You were out of control. That knife is filthy.
What do you think I'm gonna do with it? Take out her tonsils?
Ha!
Is this as good for you as it is for me?
Life can suck.
That's it. We're breaking up.
Where do you want to start with this?
There are so many things. Well, I'll do the quick rundown blurb that inevitably we have to do because we are a film review. So it is a 1988/89 if you're from the UK. 2 releases. Remember those days? It is the directorial debut of Michael Lehman and the writing debut of Daniel Waters, whose other notable work is Demolition Man.
He doesn't know how to use the 3 seashells.
And Batman Returns.
I am Catwoman. Hear me roar.
He's not done much since then.
He's done Batman Returns. I mean, let's be fair, that's a pretty decent...
Heather's the best Batman film. I mean...
If that's all you had to do in your life was do 2 films that people actually are still talking about 30 or 40 years later, I'd be pretty pleased.
I'd be more than happy.
I'm so happy.
So it follows our heroine, Veronica Sawyer, as she navigates high school with the group gang / clique of 3 very domineering personality types known as the Heathers, who rule the school. And she comes across newcomer JD, who is an anarchist, a sociopath, and a few other things, played by Christian Slater.
You say tomato, I say tomato.
And they basically accidentally start killing off their classmates. And that's a fun teenage film to get going with. So that's the rundown of plot if you haven't seen it or haven't had time to see it. But
It's a homicidal Mean Girls, really, isn't it?
So if you're from Africa, why are you white?
Which, I joked about this beforehand. I, having not seen it, although watching it, I got a vague glimmer of recognition that I may have seen bits of it once upon a time. A name like Heathers, I just assumed it was something set in the Scottish Highlands with lots of prancing around foliage. But it's a much, much darker film, and one that, with 2022 eyes on it, made me go, I'm not sure about that. Is that okay? Do I really feel comfortable with this content? But homicidal Mean Girls, it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? It's the kind of the plasticky girls in their own little kind of control, with somebody who doesn't quite fit in but is part of it, with Winona Ryder as a young Lindsay Lohan, and then how that kind of plays out, really. Yeah, it's of its time.
It is definitely of its time. It was kind of considered to be like the be all and end all of fuck yous to the 80s classic high school movie. So like you're Pretty in Pink, your Fast Times, your all that kind of stuff. It was supposed to be like a big, that's not how high school really is. Those girls are terrible. This is it. But I think it does that very successfully. I think it is definitely takes those John Hughes movies and definitely gives them the middle finger, right down to the trench coat.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. It's definitely, you know, as a satirical take on John Hughes's candy floss version of adolescent America. I mean, for all I know, that is how American adolescence in the 80s was, because I'm
Possibly.
you know,
I think if you were white, it definitely was closer to that than most people would probably have experienced.
Doing nothing. Go away. Okay, well, since you're frozen, I'm going to take my nubs. Nub, 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 nub.
White and middle class. The 80s were a great time in America, right? Anything else? Probably not.
what I love is that at one point he wanted to pitch this to Stanley Kubrick.
As a 3-hour epic film.
I still can't get my head around this as a Kubrick concept. And I know, like, he references Doctor Strangelove whenever he talks about this. And I guess there are certain parallels in kind of the chaos and the bombing. Spoiler. But it's not a Kubrick film. There's no way that was ever a Kubrick script. Ever.
I don't know. You don't see Heather Chandler sitting with like a swirly of milk in her hand and like hanging around in like really nice wide open Kubrick-esque spaces. Veronica, here's the thing that I have to say. No, I don't. It's one of those things that as somebody who I did like the bare minimum of looking into Daniel Waters. I apologize. I do research everything to the I don't, but I try my best to do something. And he was a video store clerk, and I think as somebody who's a video store clerk, you immediately go like, if in the 80s, yes, Daniel Kubrick, he will do my film. It will be a 3-hour epic, and it will be the best thing that has ever happened. I just want to see what was in his head when he envisioned Stanley Kubrick's version of Heathers, which probably would have been called Stephanie's or something else. But
I don't know. I mean, Kubrick had a sense of humor, and he had an ability to do stuff that wasn't just all the kind of Kubrick-y serious horror stuff. There's plenty of horror. There's plenty of comedy, even something like A Clockwork Orange.
yeah,
It's dark and it's black, and I can kind of see in that sense like why that kind of black comedy may have been something you pitched to Kubrick. But as it stands, I mean, this works quite well. There are surrealist moments within it. I think that the juxtaposition of the lives, I mean, particularly the kind of that middle class home life seems very at odds with the sort of the high school corridor system. And I find that slightly odd. And I mentioned this in the last one we did. I talked about If last time around, and If again come back to me when I was kind of watching this. Is it you know, when you kind of go from kind of the tomfoolery and the pranks in the cafeteria, to suddenly, you know, he's out there pulling a handgun on people.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of at home when they're sitting down for a very nice prim and proper dinner. For Veronica's family, and croquet on the lawn, or even, you know, JD's father, and that kind of weird, well, hey, let's just blow up everything kind of mentality and fuck everybody else.
Yeah.
Like, that just, again, seems quite odd. It's very exaggerated, and that in itself feels quite surrealistic to me, which maybe does feel slightly Kubrickian.
Possibly. I it's one of those things where I agree. I'm like, if Stanley Kubrick got a hold of this ever in his lifetime, he would have probably have gone, what? No, and thrown it, and probably used the script to build kind of a cacophony of movements and sounds, and that would have been interesting to see. But yeah, I agree. I think while it is black humor and it is pitch black, it's like coal dust, it's that dark. The satire in it feels too fluffy for someone like Kubrick to have ever been able to sink his teeth into. So it's kind of but I do like Daniel Ward's ambitions of being like to studios, this is a Kubrick film, and they went, or you can have this first time director who kind of likes it, and you have like $3 million to make it in a month, and that's what you get. And he went, okay, let's do that instead. But I always do admire ambitious writers who go, yes, this is what it will be. my first vision of it won't be touched. But Winona Ryder has read the original super long version of the script and said it's one of the best literary works she's ever read in her life.
Oh, well, there you go then.
So
I'm
it
not
might
gonna
have been
argue.
pretty good, but no one will ever know because I don't think it's been generally released anywhere. If you can find it, link it in the Discord and we'll read it and we'll make it ourselves in a Stanley Kubrick-esque. Wait, we won't do that because A, it would take too long. And B, I don't have that kind of time. And
Well, that and the kind of I'm aware that this has been adapted a couple of times already into other media, and it seems to have watered down a lot of what makes Heathers so memorable.
I think what's interesting is that in every kind of reference to it, because it's been referenced more than I think it's been seen. It's one of those kind of cults, especially in American television, where they kind of reference it an awful lot, even though not many people have seen it, and it gets more sanitized every time it's referenced. So when I certainly remember the first time I saw it being like, oh, this is not the film I was expecting. I was definitely expecting something way lighter and funnier, if I could say it, like just out and out funnier. As an adult rewatching it, I can see the nuances of the script writing and et cetera, et
You know,
cetera.
you just lost like a dozen people.
I know, I'm sorry.
Girl, bye. Bye. Get out. Get out. Get out.
I do love it. It's a good film, but when I first saw it, I was disappointed. And then on a second watch, you kind of go, right, okay, I've got every kind of sanitized version out of my head. Let's watch it for what it is and then appreciate it more, which is something I don't like to do. I like to see, if I have to see a film for the first time, I usually like to have no reference point. But it's 30 odd years old, so I didn't have a choice when I first saw it. But yeah, the references, even in like Saturday Night Live and things like that, it comes up, like the bit with the liverwurst and like that kind of running joke is with her family of good pâté. It's like so blasé, and then you watch it and you're like, oh no, if this dude pulls a gun in the first 5 minutes of this film and shoots at two classmates, and you're like, oh wait, no, this isn't the fluffy kind of light satire I was expecting of a teenage film from 1988. It's a bit much. It's very impactful. It's very dark. As I said, it's cold dust black. And I think there was a lot going on in the 80s, especially in America. There was a lot going on everywhere. But in terms of teenagehood, you had like the beginnings of like satanic panic starting to kind of blow its way through. You had a lot of coked out teenagers and like huge drug problems, and then there was Reagan, and there was all this kind of stuff floating around. So to see like a John Hughes movie where it's like everything is fine and like, you know, oh gee, Dad, I don't have my homework done, like The Breakfast Club, like. Another, it is a good film, but at the same time, like, all of your problems are so surface level, whereas this one actually attempts to tackle some of the kind of things that teenagers deal with, like feeling adequate. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously the perception is generally that this is a film about suicide, which it isn't.
No.
As Lehman himself said, I'll quote what he says. He says, it's not about teenage suicide. It's a satire about all sorts of things, but not teenage suicide. The movie is about the general perception of teenagers and the speed at which a community is able to believe that murders are suicides. It's a film about homicides, basically. It's a thriller, I guess, of sorts. With it feels like I watched the new series of CSI last night, and it's like there's elements of that in it, in that kind of sort of thrust, and it's that suicide element that I think throws you, and it's certainly what I found more uncomfortable was the lightness around it, but also, even within that lightness and that satire that's there, there's a real punch and a real truth to it. I mean, the very fact is that suddenly they're able to accept that a community isn't suddenly going around the school killing themselves, which is what actually does happen. And statistically, that is, you're more likely to have more suicides in somewhere where there's been a suicide already. It's a known issue. There are several attempted rapes within the film.
Yep.
Which are not entirely unaddressed. I mean, JD even points out the kind of the rapey potential before he himself then gets quite rapey.
Yep.
So there's a real kind of genuine issue here. There's the bullying issue within the film, which is sort of given as the reason that people behave in the way that they do, that they become homicidal, which seems so prescient. This is 10 years before Columbine, and Columbine's the thing that people think of a lot within this. And if you're too young to know what Columbine was a massacre. Basically, it was the first of the major US school shootings that sort of don't seem to have stopped in the 20 odd years since. But again, you have a protagonist in JD that is dresses quite like the two guys that perpetrated Columbine. There's a similar kind of attitude. There's the indiscriminate shootings that go on, and I mean, he's planning things out, but also the plan to blow up the school, which again is the bit that everyone forgets about Columbine. Is that Columbine wasn't meant to be a school shooting; it was meant to be a bombing exercise. Just the timers all got set wrong, and so the bombs didn't go off. So it feels eerily, uncomfortably like it's in tune with what the American psyche was doing at that point. And it uses the comic effect to kind of to throw us, to make us kind of, I suppose, feel slightly comfortable with it. And we kind of, anytime you've got that kind of black comedy, there is always an element, I think, as a viewer, where you should feel like, oh, I don't know about that. I feel a little bit like that was a bit too close to the bone. But that's also why it gets away with it and why it works, because it allows us to kind of really see what's going on. It allows us to address the elephants in the room that normally, you know, in a John Hughes film, you can't do. Yeah,
it definitely allows you to assess your own moral compass and to see where it falls. I think what's really interesting as well is that even without meaning to necessarily, it actually becomes quite a commentary on the ineptitude and lack of ability within American law enforcement, which when you take into effect that the Rodney King beatings and everything in LA were not that far away from this film, and kind of the police force in America being up for question from probably, I would say, the mid 80s right through until present day. It does get you thinking of like, how easy is it to get away with something in the US when you're a white middle class, all American, effectively looking person? And again, I think with you're completely right with like references to Columbine, and the thing with Columbine is everyone wants to be like, oh, it was a bullied teenager, and you know, if only someone would talk to them, and it's not. That's complete bullshit. Yeah. That was absolutely not the case. Those two guys were absolutely fine, and from a popularity point of view, they did not have major issues. They were just products of the systematic violence that exists in America and the ideology that if you have a big enough gun, you can win. Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of the odd thing about this as well, is that, you know, if you assume that they are actually, if you take the precedent, the idea that they are trying to kill themselves, which is how it's set out to look. I mean, again, they are all popular people, hated though they may also be, polarizing people perhaps, but these are not people that are massively finding it difficult to have a community. They have a group of people around them. They are affluent. They're white. Yeah. This film's so white. So, I mean, they don't really fit into that notion about what it is, but it's, I mean, I'm always reminded of that Elvis quote about how I used to get lonely in the middle of a crowd. And, you know, that you can have all those things, but still be absolutely desperately sort of alone. And I think even though this is a murder, and even though it becomes like this kind of fad, I mean, actually, the teachers are the worst in this in terms of their response, because they totally kind of try and manipulate it and monopolize it and turn it into a PR exercise rather than actually having proper empathy with them. But it's also problematic. I find this a hard one to talk about because I don't want to kind of go, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this doesn't sit right and this doesn't sit right. But that's exactly what this film does. And I think, like, even down to something as simple as like, you know, you wouldn't, where they've got the two football jocks who, having been quite rapey, in fact, I think actually do commit a rape. Yes. Sort of on camera in the background of whatever else is going on as she kind of escapes, as Veronica escapes the scene. Then they're killed. And there's obviously an argument that says, well, they're rapists, so there are people out there who will argue that rapists deserve to die like this.
you may or may not agree with this, but this is an attitude that I've seen many a time on social media platforms, so I know it exists out there. So you have that, but then rather than kind of out them as kind of horrible rapey people, they say they were repressed homosexuals, and therefore that's why they killed themselves in a kind of very tragic love tryst.
Yeah. And so you have all the empathy in the world, and they get away with it twice, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I think that's why Heather Duke's storyline is the one that resonates with them in the most. She's the cheerleader. She's the one who actually thinks that it's all real.
That's Shannon Doherty's character. That's Heather Duke.
No, sorry, I've got the wrong one then.
Helen McNamara, she's the one that actually tries to kill herself.
That's the one I'm talking about. I know my films. But yes, no, Heather McNamara, she actually tries to kill herself. She has she arguably has the most trauma throughout that whole film. And you can see why. I mean, you've also got like Shannon Doherty's character has the worst kind of eating disorder on the planet because of the stress and the degradation she suffers at the hands of her best friend consistently, and God knows what's happening at home. And again, that's kind of like that's a joke. Like, it's fine to hate on the popular girl because and you know, why is she throwing up every 2 seconds? You're like, mental illness, innit?
Oh, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's clinical depression.
Everyone has trauma. Who are you to judge someone else's trauma? And that kind of is where I kind of feel. So like Ram and Kurt being repressed homosexuals and getting away with stuff is probably the one bit that I have the most problem with, because I'm like, everywhere else there's kind of a means of a redemption arc. You know, people are human and all the rest, but those two are written so chaotically evilly. As in, they are just the epitome of everything that you're supposed to hate about the white cis male. And yet our protagonist does the exact same thing and creates the same kind of trauma to someone he supposedly loves. So then you're like, we're supposed to believe that all white cis men are the problem? And I'm like, that's also not okay. Because like the only two men in the film that are kind of unproblematic, apart from the father figures who are problematic in their own way, are the two guys who run the school newspaper, who try to give Veronica a heads up. They try to help her out, and they're like, but then equally are editing the yearbook, and they're like, you know that traumatic thing of your friend dying? Have you got any like bits and pieces we can throw in there?
Well, I see. I mean, that's the other one. That's one of those ones where you got the real life kind of interferes as well, because Jeremy Applegate, who's the plays Peter, who's the newspaper guy, actually did kill himself in real life at the age of 34 in 2000. I mean, so there's, and I think, you know, as much as that, I think those conversations about the real world also have to apply into these, and you're kind of looking at this, and it just adds a little layer under the text about the real life experiences. I mean, this is a film that you kind of expect to come in here having a really light, joyful conversation about, and I don't know how you can have that without getting really dark really quick, because it is a really dark film.
Well, that's the thing. I think people, again, see it and see the references that it's had and go, like I did, and go, oh, it's a lot lighter than it was. And don't think about the consequences of the writing. And then you go back and you rewatch it a couple of times. You're like, no, I don't know how you can gloss over everything that's happening on this level. Because there's like the suicide thing in particular, where you're like, for kids who might be coded a certain way as well, that is a very real reality for a lot of people. And certainly something that dregs up past memories for a lot of people as well. I think we've all had dark moments, whether or not you've been pushed that far as a teenager, I don't know, but a lot of us have. And yes, it's easy to go, oh, let's just watch this and never talk about it again, and let's pretend we don't have our feelings churned up about it. I'm like, the consequences are never permanent in Heather's. And I think that's the point, is that around the time it was written, at least in interviews, this is what Daniel Waters has said, is that there were so many specials being churned out on television. And he was like, so the consequences weren't real. It was like teenagers were watching talk about someone who'd committed suicide, and suddenly they were vindicated and loved and adored, and it just made it a more attractive option. So the permanence of it was never real.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, especially as you said, the teachers, you're like, the adults in this situation should at least be like, this is terrible. But no, they're again using it for their own gain.
Well, I mean, for me, the most poignant one within it is Martha, who tries to walk into traffic. Well, she does walk into traffic.
She does.
I mean, unlike the Heather that is stopped from actually taking the pills, Martha makes the attempt, and somehow it's okay because she's a bigger girl. She's less conventionally attractive. She's set up right at the start of the film as a point of mockery, and whilst Veronica clearly has concerns and issues around it, a bit like, you know, a bit like we had the same sort of character whenever we were talking about Submarine. They kind of don't really matter, and yet they have the power to kind of really I mean, they feel real in a way that some of the others don't, that the other incidents don't do. I know it's a really odd one. Yeah.
What I find strange about it is how predictive it is. Like, as you said, with like mass shootings in the US didn't really start until they're like in schools, weren't really a thing until the 90s. You know, mass teenage suicide and suicide pacts, at least being publicly recognized, came sort of in the turn of the 90s with like the satanic panic coming back round and like things like that happening. And then teenage anarchy has always been a thing, but in that real kind of systematic, violent way of planning an agenda and carrying it out. Because I think, again, kind of came into its own in kind of the mid 90s, early 2000s, and sadly continues today, where I think it's the internet's fault in a certain way. But in the 80s, JD was just a voice shouting into the ether, and he finds one other person. Whereas now, if you shout into the ether, you'll find 100,000 people who share your.
Oh, he'd be a cult leader today, without a doubt. He would like the Alex Joneses of the world would just like have lots of people following them. The music in the film, I mean, so you got Que Sera Sera played twice.
Yep.
Which sort of almost feels like that's the attitude. It's like, you know, look, whatever is just like suck it up and get on with it, kids.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the big fun, specially written song. Which, I mean, instantly just makes me think of that Grange Hill song from the 80s about the drugs, you know.
Yeah.
Just say no, no. Just say no. Just say no, no.
Yeah, the music in the film's very, like, because there's a lack of it, except for those two songs. Because again, looking for something, it's so silly, but some of you guys would have been here, looking for a playlist to pop on at the start. There isn't a Heather's soundtrack. It's those two songs plus the sound...
The score?
The orchestra score.
Right.
And there's nothing else that's kind of been compiled since, which I find really interesting, especially when you think of the 80s and you think of 80s teenage films. There's always one big musical number that's like, yes, that song reminds me of like Tom Cruise, like sliding on the floor. Yes, that's one. And then, oh yeah, don't forget about, yes, well, we're walking through Breakfast Club and But Heather's doesn't have that. They have one that they wrote themselves, which is still annoyingly catchy. Yeah. But again, kind of picks up on the lack of music throughout the film is kind of eerie. It adds this level of sinister that I didn't recognize in the initial watch, but
yeah, I mean, like I think about my own adolescence. I mean, my whole youth was spent with my head plugged into some sort of music. You know, like that was how I avoided everybody else.
Yeah.
It's actually, let's be honest, if you see me walking down the street, that's still what I'm doing.
Just even now, I mean, I'll just put that over there.
Thanks very much.
No,
just
professionals.
It's very. Yeah, I mean that is striking, and obviously it's been compensated now with a TV series and save that for another day, and a musical. So obviously there is now music associated with this, and a song about my dead gay son. Great. I mean, these things exist for whatever reason, but yeah, it's all. And I kind of wonder, is that also partly because of the discomfort that people may have felt at the time with being associated with a story like this? I mean, this was a film that a lot of agents and parents were kind of
wanted to pull people out of.
You can't be in this film.
I mean, even famously, like Doris Day refused to have her version of Que Sera used because she didn't like the profanity in the film. So it's one of those films that I think will go down in the testaments of history as something that was dark and deliberately so, and would never be repeated today. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's still up for debate. I think it's a very good precursor to a lot of difficult conversations. Unfortunately, because it was written in 1986, the language used in it is so overly problematic, and there's no care or to consequence in it that I'm like, maybe not then. Maybe it's not a good point to start a conversation with. Maybe we just leave it in the archive as its own thing and just let it be, and just watch the musical instead, which is arguably better in terms of storytelling. That's another conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd agree with that one. I mean, but then that's the film historian in me that's just sort of used to, like, I think with the right caveat, like, this is a film of the 80s that you're about to watch.
Yeah.
That's all you need to say to someone is like, this is a film that was made 30 years ago. Attitudes were different. If you have not learned that by now, there is definitely a problem.
Yeah.
And you have to go in with that knowledge and just kind of see how you feel. But I also think it's really good for us as individuals to have our morals questioned, to have our viewpoints questioned. And just the same as, like, we could watch something now that maybe is for a modern audience that feels a little bit odd, that maybe is I have a friend who constantly talks about everything being too woke.
Yeah.
But sometimes I kind of think, well, actually, maybe you're right. Maybe it would be good to just say the things that you're thinking, because that's how we learn, is that you express an opinion. I don't agree with it, but then we can have a discussion about why it is that makes me feel uncomfortable and I don't agree with what you're saying. To pretend this stuff wasn't said and that people don't still have those attitudes, because they do, I think it's dangerous. So, I mean, I'm glad I watched it. It was uncomfortable, and this was a heavier discussion than I thought it might be.
Yeah, I was expecting this to be light and airy and lovely. Cause
I mean, I didn't even get to ask you how you would go about setting up a fake suicide for somebody else.
Cyanide in milk.
Cyanide in milk.
Yeah, there's a lot of tea drinkers around here at Accidental. I think that would be an accidental.
Only problem is it's very noticeable. Cyanide's the one that smells of almonds.
Unless you get almond milk.
Now there may be the secret.
And that's it. How about yourself? How would you do that?
I'm not going to tell you that. If I tell you how I'm going to do that, then next time it happens, you're gonna.
I'm just gonna not drink any more of this. I'll just put that there.
I mean, to be fair, you did bring the drinks in tonight, so I've been drinking quite happily at the water, and now I'm questioning it all. It definitely didn't taste almondy, but I don't know.
And that's a gift that we'll take from Heather's. Never ever accept drinks from anybody ever. Full stop. The end. Not your friends, not your family, not anyone. Just make your own drinks, damn it. And that was Heather's moral of the story.
Maybe it's time to take a vacation.
Time restriction, so we have to wrap up, unfortunately. So I'm quite happy to talk about that. And also, have you ever played croquet?
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone in their life has ever played croquet.
I've played croquet.
Wow.
I used to play it at school.
And that's at school. Yeah. And that's the truth of it, guys. So there we have. We've revealed Robert J. Simpson's secret Heather. You heard it here first at Never Seen It Film Club.
Or am I a Veronica?
No, you're definitely a Heather.
I definitely had a friend who was a JD.
Yeah,
I'm quite glad I don't see him anymore.
It's true. I think we had my name is Emma, and there's like 50 billion of us in this country alone. There was a little group of us, and we were affectionately known as the Emmas because of the Heather. So that's my last tidbit for this conversation. But yes, thank you so much for joining us today for Never Seen It Film Club. If you're not a member already, that's okay. You can find a link down here in the description. I'll take you through. It's just £3 a month. And for that, you get to be a part of our lovely Discord community and come along to a screening once a month, and also get the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting a tiny little venue with big dreams, which is what we are here at Accidental. You can also follow us at Accidental Tea on Twitter or Accidental Theatre on Facebook, Instagram, and anywhere else you care to find us. You can also follow the amazing Cinepunked.
Yes, we're on Twitter and most places as Cinepunked. You'll get us on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I've just set up a TikTok. Don't know what's going to happen there, but there is one of these things. And we're Cinepunked Film on Instagram. Or if you just like to look at me and don't want to do the rest of the stuff, it's Avalard, AVALARD, over on Twitter. You'll get me there. But it'll be more kind of other film conversations.
I would definitely check those out because there's some very interesting content in there. Plus, Robert is very handsome, so that doesn't hurt either. This discussion is going to be exclusively edited for you guys on the membership. And then we'll also be releasing it as a podcast, which you can find over on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, which apparently is a new thing, which exists. I didn't know about until 3 days ago. Or you can just Google us. We're Never Seen It Film Club. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. My name's Emma from Accidental Theatre. This is Robert J. Simpson from Cinepunked, and we run Never Seen It Film Club, the film club where we watch films that you've never seen. We'd really appreciate it if you could come and join in to our membership program, where you can come and see a lovely film in our beautiful book bar every month, and it costs just £3 a month, and it's amazing. The membership button should be right about here, so if you're just there. And if you can't join the membership, that's no problem. Just like and subscribe to the channel.